thank you everyone for coming to our author Q&A together today, and thank you all for attending all of our programs for Door County Reads 2023. We really appreciate it. Today's author Q&A is sponsored by Door County Library Foundation and the Friends of the Door County Libraries. Right on Door County is our partner for today, and we thank Novel Bay for being available to sell books in the hallway afterwards. So if you want your novel signed afterwards by Andy, he'll be available in the lounge to your left. All right. So I want to say thank you to the Sturgeon Bay High School and to Spencer Gustafson for hosting us today. And I want to say thank you to Rebecca Meacham. Rebecca's short story collection, Let's Do, won the UNT Press's Catherine Ann Porter Prize in Fiction and received the Wisconsin Library Association's recognition for outstanding achievement. Her flash fiction collection, Morbid Curiosities, won the New Delta Review Chapbook Prize. She is a professor of English at the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay, where she directs the teaching press and chairs the BFA in Writing and Applied Arts program. Andy is our author of Raft of Stars. Thank you very much. And that's published by Echo. That's published by Echo HarperCollins. His fiction and essays have appeared in Image, Lit Hub, and Dappled Things. And Euro fishing, hiking, and hunting in Wisconsin's North Woods. And after a tour of duty in Afghanistan, he earned his MFA from the Iowa Writers Workshop. He lives in Ohio and is a visiting professor at the Wittenberg University. Thank you both so much. If you have questions, I'll be, during the presentation, I'll be wandering around with the microphone so you can raise your hand. For those of you who are watching us online, you can type your questions into the chat at any time, and we'll get those back to Rebecca.
We're learning. Oh.
Hello. Yay.
Did we get it? We got it. We can take this on the road now. I'll just start by saying thank you to all of you out there in the crowd. The lights just dimmed, but we can just see the tops of your heads, and there you are. Great, look at that. Bring the house lights up. But it's great to see you here, and how many people love this book like I do. I'm so excited to be talking with its author today. And what we're gonna do is have a conversation and then have plenty of time for your questions. And for those who may be watching us through the space age technologies of Zoom or Facebook, I do believe we'll have the capacity to answer questions that you might be posting out there in TV land or whatever we would call it now. So that's how we see things going. Can you hear me okay? Am I hitting the right levels? Okay, excellent. So do you go by Andy or Andrew?
Andy's great.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Andy, did you want to start with something, or would you like me to fire a question at you first?
I can start us off a little bit. Can you all hear me okay? Okay, wonderful. First, I just want to start by saying thank you for coming here. And thank you, Dominic. Thank you, Door County Reads. Thank you to the Sturgeon Bay High School. It is just absolutely incredible to me to finally have a book out. It's something I worked over 10 years toward. And to have people reading it and to be able to discuss it is just incredible. So thank you. Thank you for coming today. I also realized that, well, I wrote a poem on the way here. And I want to read it to you. And it's pretty bad, and it's a rough draft because I wrote it while I was driving. But
oh, by hand even. I'm not.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah. But I live in Ohio these days, and I've lived in Ohio for about 8 years. And I drove up here. You know, I pulled into town with a rental car with Illinois plates on it. You know, it's like bad form, right? So I was thinking, like, how can I build some trust and prove to you in some way that I did indeed grow up in the 1990s Northwoods of Wisconsin. So I wrote a poem I did not title it yet. Can you help me title it when it's done?
Let me hear it.
Okay, all right. It's my best attempt. Bear with me. Help me title this poem. It's a love poem to the Northwoods. First off, it's pronounced pasty, not pasty. No one says it that way unless they're from Illinois. If you're lucky enough to travel here, to the 1990s Northwoods, please know the towns you may have passed through are pronounced Kenosha, Waukesha, Oconomowoc, De Pere, Suamico, Crivets. Stop for donuts and crivets near the Citgo. Stop in Lena for the cheese curds, and Wasaki for the ice cream shop. If after all of that you are thirsty, ask for a bubbler, not a water fountain. We don't know what that is. Welcome to the up here, the up north, a land of fire numbers and forests, good people, favorite flannels, trucks. Up here in the 1990s Northwoods, Friday is for fish fry, Saturday is for Mass, and Sunday is for Brett Favre and Reggie White. Up here it's not called Thanksgiving break, it's called deer season. And after you fill your tags and register your spike at the North Star Bar out on County N, you might be lucky enough to still catch the chicken dinner at Schaefer's Supper Club with complimentary fried gizzards, being sure to add on the salad bar with its iceberg lettuce, shredded carrot, sliced radish, pickled beet, and cottage cheese. Amen. Hallelujah. Sacred 1990s Northwoods, Wisconsin, may you live on forever in my bones and my soul, exactly as you are. Thank you. So, my Northwoods, I grew up in Niagara, Wisconsin. My Northwoods is just across the water, but I'm always so glad to come home. Anything to me north of Green Bay is home. So glad to be here.
I have your title.
Yes?
I've been thinking about this. The one thing I didn't hear you mention that I don't know if it was in the 90s Wisconsin was Quick Trip. Right?
No.
I was a Sitco guy.
Okay, so that's not part of it?
No.
Then my title won't work because it was Quick Trip. I was like, it's kind of like a quick trip, right? And okay, all right, I'm bad at titling.
Sitco.
Call it Sitco.
Yeah.
What about, does anyone have any suggestions from the audience about the perfect title for that poem, the ode? Is it an ode?
You started out saying it was a love poem. I like that.
A love poem to the 1990s Northwoods.
Yes.
Right on.
It's all right
Yeah.
there.
Cool.
That's good.
Thank you so much for letting me read my Highway 41 poetry. So, yes.
Did you actually, I have to know this.
Yeah.
Did you write while you were driving?
Slowly.
Okay.
Carefully.
Yeah.
It was a very empty road and I had it on cruise and I'm in a rental car with the, the lane assist, empty highway. So I would think of a line and then say, pickled beet. And then I would drive again. So I was careful.
I love the way you're so old school that it's not don't text and drive. It's don't literally write a poem in a notebook as you drive.
My apologies.
Well, it's great. So I thought that I would then follow that up because that was a tremendous ode to place, right? And the places, this is obviously a novel very much entwined with and could not happen without the setting and the place where it takes place. And so I had asked for Dominic, our host, for what's on everyone's minds. What's kind of the big question out there among readers like yourself of this novel? And he said, excuse me, I get my glasses back on here. He said, the one question everyone is dying to know is, where in Wisconsin is this supposed to take place? It pulls geographical elements from all over Wisconsin. So I just want to say we're talking to a fiction writer about where the setting of this novel comes from. Can you answer that?
Yeah, thanks so much. So the novel takes place in Clay Pot, Wisconsin, in the fictional county of Marigami County, Wisconsin. And it became apparent to me early on that the influences and the landscapes would be drawn from a variety of places. So the opening scene with those boys pushing their bikes between marshes and cornfields was inspired by Brillion, Wisconsin, south of here. That's my wife's hometown. And then, you know, the gorge and the rivers were very much inspired by areas around Niagara, Wisconsin. Has anyone been to Piers Gorge? Yes? It's my favorite place on planet Earth. And I grew up, you know, we would go fishing there, we'd take our bikes down there, we'd fish in the rapids. Later on in life, after I was in the Air Force, I started guiding whitewater rafts there. So I was definitely pulling from Piers Gorge as well. And then I have family as far north as, say, like Ontonagon, Michigan in the UP, the area of the Porcupine Mountains, where the waterfalls get a bit bigger and the hills get a bit bigger. And I just couldn't decide on a place, and I liked the freedom of a fictional county. If I wanted to make the river turn left instead of right, I could do that. If I wanted to make a waterfall a little bit bigger than a waterfall is in northern Wisconsin, I could do that. And I enjoyed that freedom. And it was fun to pull from you know, these 300 miles that I just love. So, yeah.
So it's truly like a collage of all of those different elements that you love so much.
Yeah. Marigami County is definitely a collage of spaces, and I'm writing my way into it again. I am at work on a second book that's also going to take place in Marigami County, Wisconsin. So once I finished writing Raft of Stars, I just knew, like, no, this place, these people, I'm going to write about them again. So it's going to be different characters, but I'm really enjoying expanding this world and dropping some real spaces. In this next manuscript, they have to go to the hardware store in Crivets, even though they live in a fictional town once again. So in my mind, if I had to choose like an absolute heart of this space, to me, Marigami County exists just a little bit north of Crivets, you know, and a little bit south of Florence, perhaps. But.
All right. Are there Crivets and Florence fans in the crowd here? Yeah, let's hear it. All right. That's excellent. So now I'm having this like interviewer conflict because I really want to hear about the second book for a minute. What are you at liberty to say about the next book coming out about the place?
Yeah, it's going to come out with Echo Books again, and I'm in the middle of a big rewrite. Maybe we can talk about that later. But it's going well. This one takes place in a town called Thunderwater, Wisconsin, also in Marigami County. And so far it's about a young family moving north in 1993 Winnebago Brave camper. They've got young kids, and they've just put it all on the line financially in order to purchase a whitewater rafting company from their very eccentric Uncle Chip up in the Northwoods. So they have to deal with competition. They have to deal with the floods of 1993, if you remember the great Midwestern floods that were happening. It's been fun to research, like old video footage of Al Gore on a boat going through a street in some town in Illinois. Yeah. So there's competition, there's rising water, there's family strife, there's Northwoods, Wisconsin camp life happening. And this family has to somehow, this community has to pull it all off by the story's end.
Wow, that sounds great. Okay, all right. So thank you for sharing that. I'm working that through because it's so interesting. I wonder very quickly who are you thinking of as your point of view characters in that situation? I know, for example, in Raft of Stars, you have a child point of view character and two adult point of view characters. And so there's an interesting classification issue that comes from that, right? Is this meant for young readers? Is this meant for as a young adult book? Or is this for adults? And we can talk about the process of publication and how that created some questions in marketing and all of that later. So I wonder, for the second novel, whose brains are you in? Whose perspectives are you following?
I'm following the points of view of the husband and wife characters.
Okay.
Yeah, and their struggles as they navigate this summer and all the competition that's occurring. So
Okay.
yeah,
Excellent. When's that come out?
hopefully,
Mhm.
right? If
Yeah.
I can keep waking up in the dark and writing before work every day, hopefully in 2024
Okay.
is the hope. So
Excellent. All right.
Yeah.
We're going to hold you to that.
all right,
We'll
I'm
make-
working hard.
We'll make you meet your deadline because we're excited.
Please do.
It's very
Yes.
cool.
Call me in the morning at 6:15.
That's when you do it. Okay, so I wanted to talk a bit about that experience you mentioned, or have you talk a bit about that experience that you mentioned that led to so many of the scenes that are so moving in this novel about being on the river and working with rapids and rafting and the experience of that. And so I was talking to you earlier this week about what we might discuss, and what struck me about this novel was I have no plans ever to be on a boat that goes through a rapid. This is not an adventure I need to have. I don't even want to take a cruise. Like, I have a distance from boats that I enjoy. I kayaked for the very, very first time in my life, like a summer ago, and it was great. Although my teenage daughter was the one who told me I could, stop rowing, Mom. Let me handle this. So I have no skills. So what I was so surprised by as I was reading a heavily rapidy, watery book, right, was learning of the pleasures and the, I think of peril. I think of rapids, danger, yikes, get away. This would be my main obstacle. But I love the way that in here you're describing the pleasures of, and even, of even navigating where this was new to me, knowing this, how you want to turn sideways, or you need to work with what that particular rapid is doing in order to get through it. So I wonder if you might want to talk about how your experience informed some of that writing, but also just how you take pleasure in those kinds of things.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Sorry.
So I started whitewater rafting when I returned home from the Air Force, and I began during my summers off on the Menominee River, rafting on the Piers Gorge, and then I've continued that now that I live down in Ohio, down in West Virginia. And I absolutely love whitewater rivers. I love the not just they scare me too, quite frankly, right? But what I love about it is the artfulness of it. And what I've noticed over the years is that you can really spot like a rookie river guide versus a very experienced river guide. And I'm somewhere in the middle of that, if you're wondering. And the rookies are all muscle, and they're all panic, and they paddle really, really hard this way, take 7 strokes, overcorrect, have to turn the boat, and they take 8 strokes the other way, and they end up, hurting their shoulders in the process. In contrast to that, the really seasoned guides with like gray beards or beautiful gray braids flying out of their helmet have sort of mastered this art of flow, right? Like working with powers beyond their control. And what I have come to really appreciate about whitewater is the metaphors that it provides for writing and also for life. And some of those themes and metaphors made its way into Raft of Stars. Primarily, I'm interested, and I was interested while I was writing this, in the balance between personal agency and acquiescence. Like, when in life or on a river do I need to paddle hard, right? And try to shape circumstances into what I need them to be. And after that fails enough times and I get humiliated enough times, when do I need to learn how to acquiesce and how to flow with what actually is. I'm 40 years old, I turned 41 this spring, and I'm still trying to learn that. And in the second half of my life, if I can learn anything, I want it to be learn how to flow with what actually is, right? Rather than struggling. So all of the characters in Raft of Stars, as they go downriver, in both literal and figurative ways, I hope, are sort of navigating that balance between when do I paddle really hard and when do I have to yield to what is beyond my control. And once I do yield, will someone else or will something else show up on my behalf? Like, am I going to make it through this? Yeah.
And I think what's so interesting is how each of the characters, the point of view characters in particular, either acquiesce or fight their way through. And so one of the seemingly like more peripheral characters who's a point of view character here obviously is Cal, the transplant, right, from Texas, whose job it is as sheriff is to, and he's got his gun, and he's all sort of like loaded up at the beginning. And as he's moving through and is more and more challenged, there's this part, like he keeps getting more and more like undignified and more comical, right? And I was talking to you about, just previously to this, just how much skill it takes to write something funny and not tip it over into like Three Stooges territory, right? But keep it really funny, but also there's a real struggle going on with Cal too. So one of my favorite parts that's funny, but also shows his real struggle is his poor relationship with the horse. And there's a part where the horse is like across somewhere and he's stuck somewhere else, and he's got just a sock on, or like he's lost a shoe and he's just kind of bedraggled. And he's like, horse. He's trying to get the horse to come to me. The horse, right? Just calls it horse, right? It cracked me up so much. And there's so many of those moments with Cal. So I wonder maybe, what did you mean to do, or how do you think of Cal in the context of acquiescence or paddling really, really hard towards a struggle?
Yeah, Cal was fun to spend time with, and he was fun to sort of let loose in that forest and watch him get bucked from horses and swim white water and be cold and fail at fire making and everything. A real part of, like, in every single character there was a part of myself or my own concerns. So Cal was a guy in his mid-30s, and he was butting up against his identity and his career. Right? I'm in my mid-30s. I've been a cop because I was good at it and people seem to approve of it, but I don't know if this is really for me, right? And by the story's end, as Cal is shedding, and he's literally shedding boots and firearms as he goes along, he's also shedding that sort of that identity, right? And he's finding something else inside, and he's saying, maybe I want to farm, right? Maybe I want to do something. Did I actually want this? So that was a struggle that I think a lot, who can't sympathize with that? I certainly could. In my mid-30s as a teacher, I took this path. I seemed to do okay at it. People affirmed it. And then I'm in my mid-30s saying, like, but hang on, like, do I actually really want this? Right? Those questions were real. So Cal was that was his struggle. That was his wrestling, I would say.
And it's such a stark contrast to somebody like Miranda, the mother, right? Who, that is her name, right? Am I messing that up?
Yeah.
Oh, thanks. Okay, sometimes we're just like, what am I doing right? But Miranda, she enters the woods or the river space, and she's ferocious. She has this ferocity and this fierceness as a mother, as a woman of faith, and her approach is, I'm like Tiffany for so much of it. I want to be with her. I trust her, right? She can take over for me. So I wondered if you might talk about, her contrasting experience and vantage point and what she goes through. Because if Cal's shedding, what's she doing to you?
Yeah, she was my favorite character to write. Once I knew that there were two boys going on the run in the forest, I knew that there was going to be a sheriff somehow, somewhere pursuing them, some family members, some community members, and I knew there was going to be a mother, right? And I was a brand new father when I started writing Raft of Stars, and I felt for the first time in my life that sort of spinal, parental, protective instinct. It used to just seem logical to me. People would say things like, I would die for my kids. And I would think, that seems noble and reasonable. You know what I'm saying? But then I had one, and something in my spine just went click, right? I was like, oh my goodness, I get this. And so I was really interested in giving that to Miranda, this mother, and no black bear, no rapids, no sheriff, nothing is gonna stop me from getting my son into my arms again now, right? So she was really fun to let loose in that woods, and she was also fun to let loose in that woods because, she was a Northwoods, Wisconsin mother, deeply religious, conservative, wore an ankle-length denim dress, right? I mean, these were real mothers from my own childhood, right? And what I love doing with characters, with the Northwoods, with anything, is sort of showing that original identity, that front, and people think they know what it is. They think they know who that woman is. But then showing who that woman is beneath it all, right? So Miranda, as she goes through the forest, she finally arrives in this space, and it was probably my favorite scene to write in all of the novel, when she gets on horseback and she literally has to hike up that denim dress, right? She unveils in a way and gets astride the horse and takes off after her son like a spirit through the forest. And I just thought, as I was writing it, I was literally like, go get him, Miranda. Yes, right? And so I wanted her to come off as the kind of character that people think they know. Conservative, Christian, Northwoods woman. I know who you are and what you stand for. But she became one of the most powerful characters in the story. Now, what does she go through? She still comes up to the end of herself, and in that sense, it's her own faith. She gets to a point in the river after paddling hard enough where she feels utterly forsaken in this, and she has sincere doubts about it all, right? And she starts forsaking it all back: the wilderness, the trials, God, and that to me felt like a very realistic thing that she might go through in that process. Yeah.
Well, and that's what I was so struck by. I'm not a religious person. I'm open, but I'm not practicing. I don't have a particular school of faith. And what I was so impressed by as a writer, frankly, is how you manage to incorporate a character of great faith and who's actively praying and doing, all of these expressions of faith. But there was nothing discomforting or pushy or things that I tend to associate with. I get a little nervous around certain kinds of writing, and it was so graceful and integrated into her entire person and fundamental to who she is, and yet she cursed at she did some things that seemed like I would have that first impression, like denim skirt, okay, I know this person. I loved how complex she was, and you just did this beautifully graceful portrait of her. And I think that's really hard to pull off.
Oh, thanks so much.
I'm just praising you, I think, really is the point of that comment.
Thank you. No, thanks. You're praising Miranda, right? She's a, and I like the word complexity, because I don't think there is anything sentimental about faith. And I don't think there's anything sentimental about joy or hope or redemption, but I also think that struggles
Yeah.
and doubts and hardships and messiness are real. So to take a character like that and to say like whole hog, she is in, she believes, right? And she absolutely doubts and swears sometimes when the canoe flips over. I'm like, yeah, that's a real, that's the Christian I know. It was really fun to sort of to try to make Miranda be taken seriously.
That's what it is. Yeah.
You know?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was great. And what this all gets to me is your ability as a writer, again, praise, but this'll go to something you can talk about too, is I think that so I teach novel writing workshops to undergraduates, and I think, and so a lot of these students are in their 20s, and maybe a few are in their early 30s, and I think one of the things that's a difficulty for any writer, but particularly a younger writer, is to have characters express emotions. And I know that seems like, how hard could that be? But it's actually, to me anyway, and to the writers that I tend to see, having a character have a reaction to something traumatic or difficult or conflicting, and then making it sound, the reaction in words, sound not cliche, not sentimental, not trite. It's difficult. It's actually surprisingly hard to do. And so another thing I'm very struck by in this novel is how many, for lack of a better word, feelings there are being expressed, and particularly by, just to take it a step farther, by male characters. And even to the point where Teddy is the grandfather, right? I'm sorry, again, I have to do name checks all the time. So, because they're just so in my head, like I don't think of their name, I just think of their consciousnesses. Where Teddy's lack of emotional expression is important in this, right? He wants peace. He's been through war. He wants to just have peace. And so where he might have at one point been a young man in a nice car with a beautiful woman that had all of these options and feelings and so forth, now as an older man, he's just, let's keep it placid, whatever. So I wondered if you might want to talk a little bit about how it is that you made those decisions and what you were trying to do, and just anything about the like emotionality that we see on the page over and over. People are crying, men are weeping, and it's incredibly refreshing, but also key to some things that are going on with emotional arcs and characters too, right?
Yeah, thanks. I just always thought, people cry and men weep, in barns perhaps, right? But it does in haylofts, but it definitely happens. And I always am interested again in the complexity of an emotion. There's a line where Fish describes what it feels like to try to hold back tears in the hayloft, right? As he's thinking of his own life without his father. And then what it feels like to try to dust yourself off and go in and announce your hunger for dinner, right? Like both are true, and I think both are necessary in the lives of these people. So Teddy, in some ways, who is able to make peace with the wave of his hands, right? Mm-hmm. Seems like he's not emotional, but in some ways it's his way of saying, I know how hard this is, and being steady. Having a stiff upper lip, like there's real value in that. Like who doesn't like to have someone to lean on when they're freaking out, Right. I sure do, right? Like I need a Teddy in my life. Yeah, but who doesn't also need to release? So Fish says, it was good not to cry in front of the other boys at school. You hold it back. And he says, it was also horrible. It was awful to not cry in front of the other boys at school. And I'm just like, it's all true, or at least it all felt true to me.
Well, and it's such I find in sort of classic river literature or tales of, men and women, against real serious adversity in nature, or just more traditional stories, seeing on the page the expression of those feelings and then taking it really through, like what they are sad about and what they are doing, just that interior, the thought process it's refreshing. And I just feel like I haven't seen, maybe I don't read enough, but it just feels like that, it almost feels not radical, but kind of, right? Like you're giving space to something that in books often is not seen on the page, especially in kind of, I think I was talking with you and I was like, it's almost like anti-Hemingway, or like, I mean, granted, in Hemingway stories, you do have men who do cry or they have moments, but it's moved past. And I don't know, I just was pleased with how much space to see that in here. I feel like it's good for us.
Yeah. Can I read a short
Please
passage
do.
of feelings?
Yes.
Yeah. So this is Teddy and Bread sitting on the porch, and Fish listening in and feeling some complex things because Bread seems to have some sort of relationship with his grandfather that he might not at present. Page 7. None of it means you can't grow up good, Dale. A hell of a lot better than your old man. You're going to be a good one. You and Fisher are both going to be good. He stood now, walked across the porch boards, spat chew over the railing, and adjusted the green fatigue cap that always sat on the back of his head, its stout brim skyward. Fish was pretty sure he got that hat in Korea, but he never asked. It never left his head unless he slept, or used it to wipe sweat from his brow. You boys are good. You're strong enough to make it. You just keep going, do you understand? Yes, sir. In the distance, a pack of coyotes announced their hunt. The yipping howls lifted into the night and fell away just as quickly. Plenty of coyotes this year, he heard his grandpa say to change the subject. Plenty of hungry coyotes. Fish joined his grandpa and friend on the porch where he drank his water and watched the stars emerge in a new sort of silence. The stars hummed. Fish's blood hummed. The bad envy was gone and a new light emerged. At Fisher's mom's church, congregants often spoke over one another. It's how they talked, spoken over, spoken to, words from the Lord, for a brother. Fish never minded it, but now he seemed to understand it. Bread and fish had just been spoken over. His grandfather knew that all was not well in the world, that it was a choice to bear it quietly, and something grave and peaceful rose like a moon in Fish's heart. Thanks.
Oh, that's beautiful. I want to clap. Can we clap?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Just gorgeous. And this talk of feelings and this talk of what happens to people on the river and elsewhere makes me want to bring up, and this is like, so you can flex a little bit too, because it's very cool, the New York Times book review of your book, which was very wonderful and favorable, and is like an amazing thing. Not everybody gets reviewed by the New York Times, and not everybody gets reviewed nicely by the New York Times. So congratulations, that's amazing, and you have to feel great about that.
It made me cry.
Yeah, good. And that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
But so my older daughter is right now reading Lord of the Flies. And last night she came home from pep band or whatever she had to do, and she had homework that was due late, and she needed my help on the Lord of the Flies homework. And all I remembered about that book, having read it a very long time ago, was that everybody was horribly mean to each other, and there was a pig or something, and there was also a character named Piggy, but mainly what I remembered was people being cruel and harsh when left to their own devices in a wild place. And so I was trying to tell her these things, not as an English professor that would help her get an extra good grade on her sophomore homework, but just like that's kind of what I remembered. And so what I love about this New York Times book review of your book is that it invokes Lord of the Flies and says, kind of what you're doing differently. So I'm going to just read that real quick and then ask if you would respond to that. Okay, so this is from the review. But the wilderness softens them, the characters. Despite brushes with danger and death, roaring rapids, charging bears, loaded rifles, hunger, they don't turn inward, nor do they turn against one another. No one goes, Lord of the Flies. Instead, they do what they haven't felt free to do in civilization. Open up, cry, reveal their regrets and fears and needs. So I guess my question to you is, do you feel like you did that intentionally, just knowing that Lord of the Flies exists is kind of the model of what happens in literature, at least, the expectation. I guess I'm interested, did you mean to do that on purpose? And then my second question, I know I'm doing one of these conglomerate questions, which is a pain, but is do you think that nature uniquely allows people to get to these points in themselves?
Thank you so much. And thanks, yeah, that review did make me cry. It came out actually the morning that the hardcover was released. So after working toward writing a book for years, and I put all my eggs in this basket, and I wrote other manuscripts that took me 7 years to write, and then were rejected. And I cried on Highway 41 about it in my pickup truck. So to finally have it come out after over a decade of work in hardcover, and it was that morning, and then I got an email from my publicist saying, like, did you see this review that just came? And I read the review in my kitchen, and my family was away. It's like their school day, and I just cried. I did. I sat on my steps and cried and said, this is too much, and then I took a long walk in the woods that day and just turned everything off, because I was so grateful that the reviewer spoke to what to me was like the most important heart of this book, right? And I don't think it was a heart that I did like deliberately. I think stories can very quickly fall flat when they try to use characters as mouthpieces for some message, right? However, like my view of all the characters in this book and my view of their struggles was highly informed by my own worldview of humans, right? And my view of human beings is that ultimately, like if you peel the onion back enough, there's not something ugly inside, but something very beautiful, right? And this is a very Franciscan idea that I love, but we've got that outer layer. The skin of the onion might be like my Instagram self, Yeah. And then we go deeper and we have these self-images like Sheriff Cal thinking to himself, I am a law enforcement officer, this image works for me. And then you peel that back and perhaps we find the things that we hide from others about ourselves, or even hide from ourselves about ourselves, right? Those ugly spaces. But then beneath that, if that can break away too, that sort of that shadow self, if we can face, I mean, this is like what good therapy does, right? Face the reality of face the truth about yourself, yeah? And then maybe we can move towards something like actually healthy. So I believe that about people, There's a beautiful old saying in the church that I think captures it perfectly, and then I don't have to talk about the church anymore, whatever. But it's this old saying, the Christ in me sees the Christ in you. And it's this beautiful exchange of the best part of me, that which is unspoiled, is going to make a decision to trust, right? The best part of you, despite all these other layers that are preventing me from doing so. I do think that the wilderness has a special way of helping us shed layers, yeah? And like anyone who's been a part of like a camping trip gone wrong, you know what I'm saying? You go camping with some buddies or some friends, some family, and like 48 hours into that, being bitten by mosquitoes and like baked in the hot sun and rained on, you really get to know your family members, yeah?
But
right?
I don't feel like what's inside of us after all of that particular shedding is very good or nice.
True.
I become not a nice and good person in those
No,
circumstances.
okay, you're absolutely right. I am definitely speaking to, like, we peel off one layer of the onion and we get the hot sunburned bug-bitten person, you know?
Yeah.
And nature has a way of sort of helping peel those things back. I use the example of as a young boy, I grew up on the end of a dead-end road on 90 acres, and I and my friends would ride our Huffies around, and we would think that if someone asked us, like, what are you? We would say something like brave. I am brave, But then the sun would go down while we were, like, out in the woods. And I can't tell you how many times I would, like, fishing at Pierce Gorge, right? Having fun, catching bass, big brave Andy, then, like, ran home when the sun went down, While guiding rafts on the Peshtigo River. The Peshtigo River can get very low in late summer and very rocky. And if you ever had an experience of boating on a rocky river, we call it whitewater hiking at some points because you're just dragging your boats and it can be very frustrating. We actually called that, like, a wonderful test for engaged couples. Like, if you can get in a rubber boat together and go down the Peshtigo at low water, if you can still even make eye contact at the end of that, you're set, like you've got a shot at this life together. So now I do think, if you pressed harder than a camping trip gone wrong, which human history definitely can press harder than a camping trip gone wrong. That's when I think another layer comes off, and you find these incredibly noble, beautiful human hearts and actions.
Yeah.
I think nature is a great mirror and a great leveler in that regard.
I think what you're talking about is a letting go of comforts that we expect. Like, I expect to not be sunburned. I expect to not, in my general non-camping life, I would hope that I'm not getting bitten up by bugs. And so there's that shedding of that expectation of comforts that then that you can squabble over, and you lost the map, and where's, all of that sort of couples tension that can come. So I think it's an interesting, you get rid of that layer, and then there's that layer underneath. But I do also think that you are also speaking towards a generosity and collaboration, which is different than Lord of the Flies competition or isolation that we associate sometimes with wilderness, is going off by yourself to do whatever work it is that when you're working against nature, or that bear is your enemy, or this tree or this horse is your enemy, and you have these kind of couples working through Fish and Bread, Tiff and Miranda, and then Cal and Teddy, and they're interacting, they're collaborating as much as they're kind of fighting with each other. They're mainly working together, and then as a big group, well, at least the adults together are working towards the same goal of saving these kids. So I think there's also something to what we associate with fighting the wilderness or isolating in the wilderness. You're doing the opposite. You're doing collaboration and care and compassion.
I like that. Yeah, that's interesting.
So you're doing it.
So I'm teaching a class at Wittenberg University called Wilderness Writers, Stories of Survival and Exploration. And we start by reading some young adult novels. My Side of the Mountain, yeah? Hatchet, yeah? And then we move into some adult novels. We're reading Seawolf by Jack London, and then we read some nonfiction and some memoir, like Endurance, about Ernest Shackleton's failed Antarctic expedition, which is like one of the most incredible stories. And the goal of the class is one, like, let's learn how to do close readings of texts, right? So we do that. But the overarching question is always, what are these characters, what are authors suggesting that these characters find when they're at the very edge of things, right? Now Shackleton's failed expedition, they spent over a year, an entire Arctic winter, like floating on ice. Crazy. And no one died, and they remained collaborative, and they made it, right?
The dogs, I don't think.
The dogs didn't make it, no. But even that was sort of a form of mercy.
Yeah.
We can, yeah,
Couldn't feed them.
yeah, my daughter doesn't want to hear about that
I
either.
like that part.
Um,
But you're right, exactly.
We're always asking, what are these people finding? And there definitely are stories of this is like man in competition with the natural world, you know? We read Swiss Family Robinson last time I taught the class. And that book is very different from that good like 1970s movie with the ostriches, you know? The actual book of Swiss Family Robinson is just them like shooting everything that they see, you know what I mean? It's really wild, yeah, it's almost surprising. It's like, behold, what is that? Kablam, you know? Good job, son. And and we talk about like, where does that come from? It's definitely like a man as dominator of nature, you know?
In charge, right?
Yeah, but then there's other writers like My Side of the Mountain where it's Sam Gribley living in a tree, and he definitely has to, nature is harsh, he has to learn to survive,
Yeah.
but he also collaborates with it. He starts naming the animals, he trains a falcon, you know? So I think there's a really rich range, and it's got to be shaped by cultures and time periods and things I can't necessarily speak to, but
Yeah.
there's a long range of man as collaborator or, you know, humankind as competitor.
Well, and I'm glad that you brought in animals too, because I hated the coyotes, I understood the coyotes, I was scared of the bear, I understood the bears, right? I think that you do a very good job of bringing in kind of nature's gonna nature, right? And how humans see themselves in relationship to that can be good, you know, shoot, boom, good kabow, good job, son type of stuff, or it can be observational, and am I supposed to get involved here? And the way that the boys also are protective of that mother is there's a couple bear parts here at least, and at each conference they're different kind of encounters, and they're not, and that's the other thing too, is looking at it as a confrontation versus an encounter, which can be a confrontation, but can just be an exchange of, I see, observation, you're not a threat, an assessment. So I like the way that you, in your response, even brought in other creatures as collaborators too. Like, that feels generous, and it encompasses the spirit of what happens in that wilderness, I think, pretty well. Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah, I definitely think of nature in a complex, non-sentimental sense as well. Like in the same way, I hope a Christian character can be taken seriously if offered actual complexity.
You're right.
I see that in nature too. I mean, I grew up hunting. I spent a lot of time in whitewater rivers, and nature is beautiful and charming and funny at times.
Yeah.
And it's also like horrific and grotesque sometimes. So to bring that aspect in just felt like another way to try to nail it down.
I felt like I was learning. I really, in a good way, not in a, you know, all right, professor way, but like a way where I was like, oh, this is a way to be. This is a way to view that animal, or who I think of as an interloper, or who I think of as a threat. I appreciated that as I was like, oh, that would be another way to look at it.
Right on. Yeah. And, you know, one of the most central lines to me in the whole thing is a line that Teddy uses. Like, one, you're strong and you're good and you're not alone. And two, poor damn things.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of these characters, we've talked about how they're trying to find their way in the world, and what am I and who am I, and am I good, and do I have community? And the question sort of falls in line with, are you just a poor damn thing, or are you more, right? And I hope that Raft of Stars answers that in the positive and says, like, no, at the end of things, like, you're not just a poor damn thing.
Right.
So their interaction with nature throughout was a sort of sounding board for that.
Mm-hmm.
They're upset with this world in which there are just too many coyotes, too many poor damn things getting harmed. They are the the calves
Yeah.
being harmed.
Yes.
So there's that scene where they cook up the worms and the chewing tobacco in the stew, and before that they have a turtle, and they have that turtle on its back,
Yeah.
and Fish opens up his grandfather's barlow knife and taps the leathery stomach, and they're like, "We have to eat it, right?" "Yeah, right. We don't have any food." And he takes a deep breath and then says, "I'm not doing it." And he closes the pocket knife, and Brad says, "Phew, yeah, me neither." You know.
Yeah.
So there was a point when their very real needs, their hunger and their appetites, had to take a back seat to their view of the world.
Right.
They didn't want to take part in a too many coyotes type of thing at that moment. Yeah.
And you did, and also the fact that the novel begins with rescue, and then they have a choice at a very key moment. And then I don't know about you all. I mean, I've made some pretty bad concoctions in my time, but boy, that worm tobacco stew. And I love the way you wrote the whole scene where it was like, oh, this is going to work out. It's going to be fine. And now they're kind of buzzed, and oh no, it's taken a terrible turn. It was a terrible choice. Have you ever been in a situation in all of your experiences where you've maybe put some things together out in the wilderness there that were a bad idea?
I've definitely not that bad. Yeah, not red man tobacco and earthworms, but
Yeah.
definitely made some bad meals. I remember trying to cook bread when I was living as a bachelor with my older brother, and I was so proud to cook bread with my mom's recipe. And I offered him a slice, and he ate it, and he's like, It was just a brick, just a horrible brick.
Just a bunch of flour kind of compressed.
Something went wrong.
Yeah, the rising part's key. So what I thought maybe we might do, I have other kinds of questions I like to know about the writing process, and I have kind of like wonky craft questions I always like to know. But we're close to coming up on an hour into this, and I want to make sure that your questions are asked if you have them. So if you're right, I can pitch it over to the crowd here. So who has a question that they'd like answered? Do you want to call them? You can be the caller on it.
Okay.
You.
Yes, please.
Do you attach any particular significance to nicknaming the boys Fish and Brett?
I'll repeat it, okay? So the question is, did Andy attach any particular kind of significance to naming the boys Fish and Brett?
Yeah, those nicknames, I tried them out, and they stuck, and they felt right. For a very long time, the book was in manuscript form was just titled Bread and Fish, and then I had a really smart editor who was like, "We got to come up with something better." I was like, "Thank you." Those names stuck for me, I think, for two main reasons. One, I wanted to write a very elemental sort of story, and by that I just mean I wanted us all to have like pine needles in our hair at the end of it, and stars and black bears and coyotes and dirt and soil and rivers. So bread and fish struck me as the same, like the simplest sort of meal, the most natural sort of meal, just something very basic. So it felt good in that sense. And it also had echoes of like, Jesus feeding the multitudes bread and fish, like the idea of miraculous provision. There's very much a thread of, okay, when I get to the end of myself and have to acquiesce and fail, and the layers of the onion are all peeled back, is something going to show up for me, And some of these characters say, yeah, it will. So those echoes worked too, It has the book has a very miraculous provision sort of ending, right? So much so that it runs the risk of putting some readers off, like this is too fantastic. But that was an important part of the story for me, opening up the possibility of that and keeping it ambiguous as to whether it was literal or figurative. But miracles. Yes, sir.
With bread and fish in mind, and some of the other imagery you used, how much expecting us to read into this novel? Because there's a lot of kind of slant religious imagery peppered throughout the entire story.
I'm not expecting anyone to read anything more than what I hope is a good, solid adventure woods story that sort of takes care of your heart by the end, you know? As far as reading into allegory, I did not deliberately plan in a lot of different allegorical threads or analogies. So when they're found there, and when people tell me about them, sometimes I'm surprised, and I say, oh, like, you know, I'm really pleased by that. I'm happy that those show up. But it wasn't all deliberate, you know.
Readers always make you feel smarter than you really are. They'll
Amen.
say, did you mean, you know, what did you mean by this? And you didn't know you did that, so you're like, what do you think I meant by that? Right? So yeah,
Yeah, someone an English class once did some reading of it. It was not my English class. I don't assign my own books, but someone else's.
Right.
And they did this huge thread with the smell of lavender surrounding Tiffany and colors of purple and this idea of royalty. And they did this whole close reading, and I was like, oh my goodness. And they were like, are you serious? That wasn't deliberate? I'm like, I had no idea. I just needed a flower to smell like something. So
Yeah.
lavender, you know?
That's what my soap is in my dish at home.
Right,
And I like
yeah.
purple.
Yes,
And
yeah.
yeah.
And I always confess. Salman Rushdie once was talking about those moments when readers see things in his books that he didn't intend.
Yeah.
And he said he's always surprised, and then he says, thank you very much, I'm so glad you noticed that. I worked really hard on that. I'm like, no, I'd rather confess
Yeah.
I had no idea about purple.
Yeah,
So.
that's so funny. Other questions? Who else wants to ask something? I think I see in the very, very back in the blue coat.
Thank you. The black bear at the end of the story, on the rock in the middle of the rapids, below the falls. Was that real, or was that a hallucination of a sleep-deprived child?
Okay, so
Because
the question
on the one hand, if he's about to die, because he stopped shivering, as you imply, then the bear saves his life. On the other hand, as you point out, no way a black bear could get there.
So just to repeat the question, I'm sure you probably heard it, but so the question is, there's a black bear that appears towards the end of the novel, and there are reasons to think that it's not real. So now we're asking the author, solve the question here. What is it?
Yeah, was the bear real or not? And my answer is like a frustrating one, and I'm not trying to be coy, but my answer is yes. I don't know if the bear was real, literally, or if the bear was real figuratively or spiritually, but to me the bear was true. That's how I would say it. That bear being there was true, and that huge bear. And you're right to point out, like, the possibility that this is all just a hallucination is very real. The kid is hungry. He's hypothermic, right? Very near death, and also, you know, the guard soldiers who come the next day said, "Kid, no bear could get out here." Right? It wasn't real. And yet, he was warmed by it. He was protected by it. So the reason I think that bear was true, and the reason I loved putting it there, and it was a really hard scene to write. Probably the hardest scene to write, because it was like, oh gosh, this is going to be off-putting, but I need it. Was that it correlated to so many different things in the story. So it didn't necessarily symbolize, I don't have like a 1-to-1 symbol ratio for the bear equals bread so-and-so, but there were correlations to bread, or fish's father. There were correlations to these earlier echoes of miraculous provision, something showing up on my behalf when I no longer can. And there were echoes of correlations to the wilderness itself, this thing that this thing that sort of helped all of these characters shed layers of the onion, the very kind of pinnacle of the Northwoods wilderness, right? Like the top of that chain shows up at the end. So there were so many echoes wrapped up in that bear that felt true to me. I was like, yeah, let's do that. And I really enjoyed the idea that I enjoyed the ambiguity of the literalness of that black bear. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I saw another hand somewhere.
I have a question from online.
Oh, okay.
So 2 parts. One is, what knowledge, research, or experience Andy might have done to write this topic? Because it seems to me human services professionals felt this book was a very accurate description of trauma, experiences, and its many facets. The other response was, what about Brad's dad's life experiences led him to be the man he was, and were those related?
Those are great questions, and as I mentioned to you earlier, Dominic, I love that the panel on trauma and resilience showed up as part of this. That was just terrific. I was trying to write from an accurate perspective, that like tell a story that I could tell accurately. So I originally was writing this, like the very first chapters, first draft of this, were from Brad's perspective, not Fish's. And when it turned out that Brad was going to have a very abusive father and have to go through all of that, I had to back off because that wasn't my own experience and wasn't my own story. I believe that writers can write about things that are not their own experience and not their own story, if they're willing to do all that research. But that particular story of this hurt kid seemed too important to get right? So while I hadn't walked Brad's path, I have been in Fish's shoes and seen others walk that path around me in my life. So I felt like I could more accurately do it justice from Fish's point of view. And I'm forgetting the second half of that question. Brad's dad. Yeah. Brad's dad, I wanted to offer him humanity too, as ugly as Brad's dad was. In early drafts, he was just a pure monster, only, right? And some wise readers said, like, why don't we complicate him a little bit? And so I started thinking of ways to not excuse what he is doing to his son, but put some history behind it, right? Like Brad's dad doesn't get there for no reason. So he had his own struggles in life, right? He was described as a drunk, right? Alcoholism. He lost his wife. He had his own losses. And the response to all that was clearly ugly, but it was a response to a real history. So once I started thinking of that guy as a human being with a real life too, he became a little more rounded and more satisfying rather than just this over-the-top monster character.
Like a villain, right?
A pure villain,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, like those pure villains aren't interesting, you know? We want to know like what makes them, unless it's like a James Bond flick and they have like sharks with laser beams and stuff.
And they have to say how
Yeah,
but they give their backstory.
that's true.
They have
isn't
a
it?
whole
Yeah.
monologue about it always. So
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
But that allowing, because also at the end what I was touched by, and this involves that black bear, at the possibly the true black bear, is how, Fish didn't want Brad's dad's body. Like there was some dignity that he was trying to give the, spoiler alert if you haven't read the whole thing, the body that was trapped or whatever, right? And so and then the bear does a bit of that work, seemingly. So yeah, you're giving this sort of maybe a dignity, maybe compassion again is another way to think about it too, like adding that layer of understanding. Okay, so I saw another hand. Someone was ready to ask a question. It was you, sir. Go
I
ahead.
was just curious on your ending, and the bear was part of my question, and you've answered that. Fairly complicated, and beyond the bear, you know, Cal and Tiffany and Brett, you know, you're kind of thinking, well, they go home and create a family of their own, and I'm assuming that. But my question as a reader and a writer as well, the editing process to get to your ending, I mean, how much did you take out to get it? It's a nice size, it's a great story, but how hard was it to end it?
Yeah, that's a good question. So how hard was it to end it, and how much editing took place to get to that space? Originally, in my first drafts of it, there was an epilogue. There was a whole another chapter that followed all of these characters into the next fall.
Okay.
And in my mind, I had their relationships worked out, you know, who's going to school where, who's spending. I wrote all of that. And it was a really fun ending, and I liked it. But again, like some wise readers and editors said, like, I think this needs to end on the river. However, I'm really glad that you sort of saw those beginnings of, all right, Cal, Tiffany, maybe Brett too, right? Could become something. There's even a dog, says Constable Bobby. Writing that chapter that I had to erase allowed me to sort of point and aim everything well, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Great.
I wonder if you can just briefly talk a little bit more about the process of this book, and then I know we have a couple other for sure hands here. It started off with those turtles, or started off with the boys on the bikes in your head, right? That's at the end of the, you know, we have your overview of the process a little bit is in this type, in the reader's edition or whatever of the book. And then you've alluded to the fact this was a multi-year project. So you started off as a person in the world differently than where you even ended. You know, you were a parent by the time you were working on this later. So I wonder if you could talk a bit about, like, when did you even know this was going to involve the river? When did you even know, like, when did you know there, you know, it sounds like you had a point at which you, like, thought Brett was a point of view character. So maybe a few of the major stages of thought of this, a little bit of the process?
Yeah, and then please remind me of Constable Bobby as I meander. All right, so I have to tell the story of the failed manuscript first, the one that made me cry on the highway north of Green Bay, right? So that one, I started working on that as an undergraduate at Lawrence University. I worked on it for 7 years. I took it to grad school with me, workshopped it there. I got an agent who wanted to represent it. I workshopped it and worked on it with her. And it was at least a 7-year process. It was loosely based on my time in Afghanistan. And the agent finally sent it off to editors in New York, and I was like, here I come, world. Finally, 7 years of work coming to fruit, you know? And they got back, and it was pretty unanimous. They said, like, look, there's some beautiful characters, and a lot feels true, but you've written a boring, like a long, boring novel, you know?
Did they say it that way?
They, like, plotless. Yeah.
Plotless hurts.
They were right. They were right. And I had like a period of mourning, and I was a new father, and my wife and I were living on the Peshtigo River at the time. I was teaching at Northeast Wisconsin Technical College in Marinette, and I didn't write anything for about a year. And then finally, I did, right? And we were living on the Peshtigo River, and one night I was lighting the wood stove in my basement. I was burning old college notes. I kept every note from college, all my essays. Did anyone do that? Did you do that?
I've been cleaning out my study this last few days, and yes.
Yeah, I was like, these will be great someday. And then I just set them on fire. So I was burning papers. Out came an essay by Flannery O'Connor where she suggests a certain way of writing concretely. Long story short, I sat down and wrote for the first time that night. about blackbird and the smell of clover and the sound of tires on a path, right? And that became the opening scene years later. So once I sat with those boys for a while and started to write my way into it, I thought like, maybe I'm ready, maybe I want to try again. But I knew if I was going to enter a process that was going to take years, and Raft of Stars, I did work on it for 5 years. I didn't want it to be called plotless again, So I was thinking like, I need to learn about plot more, apparently, and think about being a conscious storyteller, right? This is storytelling. It's not just like navel gazing, And those editors of the older manuscript, they were right. Like I had like 17-page scenes of like two guys just sitting in the desert, like talking about God.
Yeah.
Boring.
Right.
Boring book. Yeah. So I had to find a good old-fashioned, like inciting incident, right? Like a loud external spark, a problem big enough to get those boys off into the woods. And I knew early on that they were going to, so I found that spark in Brett's father. He was the inciting incident and the problem that sent them off.
Yeah.
But I knew early on that they were going to be out in that woods. Because I also thought, like, if I'm going to have to close my eyes and write lines for 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years, I want it to be somewhere more enjoyable than Kandahar, Afghanistan.
Right.
Yeah. So I was like, Piers Gorge,
Yeah, your favorite place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I did that, and once those boys were off, the other characters started showing up and volunteering. So as far as planning things out, I planned very loosely, but I definitely planned for plot, just like a sentence or two per chapter, to give me confidence that something's going to happen here.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then surprises show up, and that's Constable Bobby's one of the surprises.
So now for Constable Bobby.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So Constable Bobby's sort of this, he kind of comes from real life. I had an experience in Peshtigo. I will not tell the whole long story, but we had these really mean stray pit bulls show up out in the country, and they were sort of like cornering neighbors and things like this. And they showed up at our house, and I called the police. I guess I will tell a little bit of the story. Called the Peshtigo police to like, sorry, you're out of our jurisdiction or whatever, you're out of city limits. It's not us. I was like, well, animal control? And I called them, and there was no one available. And I finally called back to the city. I'm like, what? Like, can someone help me with these dogs? You know what I mean? And they're like, you can call the constable. And I was like, what's that?
Yeah.
Like, really? Like, we had like a constable? And I'm like, okay, they gave me this number. I called it, and like 40 minutes later, this guy shows up, and he was like the age of my grandfather. He's probably a Korean War vet, Shows up in an unmarked pickup truck, blue jeans and a t-shirt, huge silver revolver strapped on his hip, and a rope. And he just walks out up to these dogs and just kind of lassos them, and then brings him to his pickup truck, puts them in the passenger seat, puts the leash in the window, and just rolls it up. And drives away with these 2 pit bulls just sitting on the bench seat next to him, And I was like, man, you are made from like different cloth than I am, Just amazing. So Constable Bobby came in, and he became a bit more like humorous of a character.
Yeah.
But like a major surprise that came during the scene in which Miranda and Tiffany learn that Brett's father has not actually been killed by this kid.
Yeah.
And they're in the kitchen.
Yeah.
And I knew that they had to learn about it soon because I wanted to get them out into the woods.
Yeah.
But I didn't know that Constable Bobby was going to be the one to reveal that until about like 10 lines or so before.
Yeah.
He's just eating cookies with his coffee.
Oh, yes.
And no one's listening to him.
No.
He's just talking about strawberry farming, and they're washing dishes.
Yeah.
And suddenly, like, he just sort of raised his hands. He's like, can I tell it? And I was like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
Bobby, you're
Take it.
perfect.
You're the one.
So there are definitely surprises like that along the way.
I have to say too that what you're describing, first off, the real Constable Bobby, that guy has to show up somewhere, because that's an exciting constable. Like, I like that guy. Like, I hope he appears in that second novel. But secondly, your whole anxiety about plot. If there is someone who doesn't know he has plot and is like not delivering plot-like information, it's Constable Bobby. He's just like talking about the most inane things and you can't stop him, and then like the most important defining active cause and effect type of information, he finally gets to it. So maybe you tucked all of that, all of the plotlessness into him.
Right on. Yeah, someone had to carry
You
it.
made it kind of charming, tastes like Oreos. I think it's kind of okay. All right, a couple more questions. I saw, go ahead.
Your personal experiences with building rafts. We thought that first raft that the boys built at 10 years old was like, wow, how did they know how to do that? You know, it just seemed like, really, could they do that?
Yeah, and in a lot of ways, the whole story, I was asking myself, like, could 10-year-old boys really do that? And it's right on, sometimes the answer is no, sometimes the answer is maybe or yes. But I like the age of 10 because I have a 10-year-old right now, and I think I thought of my own 10-year-old self, and we were still innocent, but we were also like on the cusp of experience, you know? And we did have grandfathers like Teddy in our lives who like this is how you build a fire, this is how you catch a fish, you know? So they were capable, but they also really weren't going to make it on their own long term. They were right in that space. So I did try to build things that floated when I was young. They were not as successful as that, but we were always off in the barn, dreaming up something, building something. So yeah, it was always right on the, throughout the whole novel, even that point of view was always a question of would 10-year-old boys really think this or not? And I tell a story of after the storm, there's a scene with Fish on the sandbar, and in the first drafts, he started talking like a 38-year-old man. You know, he's giving like his theory of the universe and all this stuff. And that my agent at the time was like, what if you just had him like think about the black bear again? I was like, yeah. So there was always a balance of could they do it or not.
Okay, and I think I saw one other person in the very front row. Go ahead.
When you think of book, if you were leading a discussion on the book, what would you want to talk about that we haven't covered this far?
Okay, the question is, if Andy was leading a discussion on the book, what would he want to talk about that we haven't talked about so far?
I would just ask everyone to write a poem about the Northwoods. I got the opportunity to write a sort of a reading group guide that appears in the paperback. One of the things that I think is always super fun to talk with people about is just who is your favorite character and why. And if people can name that, one, like, to me that's thrilling because it means there's a successful character that actually felt human. And two, that's one of the most interesting things to me as I write, like a piece of myself in every single one of these characters, from Tiffany to Grandpa Teddy, you know? That is always a fun discussion.
Did you have a favorite character?
Miranda, absolutely. Yeah, she was the best.
I have a comment, it's not a question. I felt coming away from this book that I knew every single character.
Thank you.
I felt very strongly that they were, I could so well develop that I could meet them on the street and know who they were.
Thank you so much. I felt like I got to know him too over 5 years. And I think they really felt like family. I do remember the day that my agent, and this book too almost became a sock drawer novel. It got passed around, and no one It was like, what do we do with this? We got this book, it's about 10-year-old boys. We don't know what to do with this. And when the time finally came that Maggie Cooper, the agent for it, sent it off, I was at a lake house with my family, a rental lake house in central Wisconsin, and I didn't hallucinate, but I had like a strong mental picture in my mind of all these characters with worry in their eyes and like hope too, paddling a canoe across the lake. And it was really, it felt so, I remember sitting on the porch with my coffee thinking like, good luck, boys. Off you go to New York, you're out of your league, you know what I mean? But they felt like family, yeah. Yes, please.
An unnamed character in the book is really nature and the storm. And first of all, I think you should put something in your poem about nature
Okay.
and storms and impact it has on individuals. But can you say something about the role of nature?
Yeah, I think one of the reasons I wanted to write such an elemental book with pine needles in my hair is simply because that's where I wanted to spend the next several years as I close my eyes. You know, I love the woods, and particularly the North Woods, and the way that the ditches smell in summertime. I remember 2 years ago, after being away for a time, we drove up and we're outside of Athelstane, Wisconsin, over by Crandon. And I pulled over on the side of the road and took a whiff of the ditches, and it's just, boom, childhood. I was like, that is the way a ditch is supposed to smell, right? It was gorgeous, yeah, so I definitely wanted to get into nature in that sense and just spend time there. And then, as we discussed, it became a really useful sounding board. You know, nature as a character was the one who got to say, you don't yet know the truth about yourself, but I'll teach you, right? With a storm, with a river, with too many mosquitoes, and so on. Yeah, good question. Thank you.
I'm going to ask you the final question, and it's going to be about me in some way. And it's not going to be, do you think I did it, anything like that? No. Have you enjoyed this? No. So, interestingly to me, so I moved to Wisconsin in 2002 or 1 or somewhere in there. And I was an Ohioan the entire time before that, with a very short little exception of moving to the South and coming right back 2 years later. So I feel like you and I are kind of a Freaky Friday pair up here a little bit, because you are from Wisconsin and in Ohio, and I am from Ohio and in Wisconsin. And my mother is, she's going to kill me for doing this, but she's right here in the front row. She moved from Ohio to build a house onto my house, and so she is a transplanted Ohioan too. And so I guess my question to you is, you know, we're making these claims about places and the kinds of people that you see there, and this is real Northwoods type of person. So I guess my questions are for you. How does your new Midwestern home in Ohio, like, what seems Wisconsin-y about it, or what seems like different to you? I mean, and I will just quickly say, when I moved here, I thought, oh, I'm from one of the most polite Midwestern places in the world, although I just recently come from Cincinnati, which wasn't as congenial as the rest of the state I was used to, but still was pretty great. And I was struck by going to the post office for the first time in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and I could not talk to everybody talked to me, and it was so nice, and everyone was so, yeah, I mean, it was just great. So that's a kind of baseline, not really exciting thing to define my new space, but I was really surprised at that. Like, I thought I'd already kind of been to that space, in addition to the beautiful landscape and all the stuff. So, character of a place, or the type of people, what's it like in your new space in Ohio, and how does it compare to those great smelling ditches back home?
Yeah, I'm just this year, Ohio is beginning to feel more like home to me.
Yeah.
Like its woods are becoming more familiar.
Yeah. Are you in a natural space there?
We live in town, but it's in a village. We've lived in small towns our entire lives, so
Got it.
definitely small town feel, very sort of like Mayberry-ish, you know?
Yeah.
I'm discovering, like I just went down to Texas, and my takeaway during this red-eye flight was people almost everywhere are like hardworking and thoughtful and like to laugh, you know?
Yeah.
I'm glad though that you say like Wisconsin was extra kind. That's wonderful, yeah.
It was wonderful. It was great.
Yeah.
I'm sorry if it's colder and less friendly there in Ohio for you.
It's not. I really enjoyed it, and there's a lot of good people. I think Ohio is an interesting space because you do have a lot of Southerners. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's kind of this real mixing pot. Overall, I'm hoping my accent settles down. Like I was, raised in the Northwoods, so I was like, yeah, there, hey, absolutely, like strong.
Yeah, yeah.
And then in the Air Force, I moved down and lived in Charleston, South Carolina. So I started picking up some Southern drawl, like, yeah, there, hey, y'all. It was bad. So I'm hoping that Ohio will mellow me out into something.
You'll find that Ohio voice.
Yeah.
We do call it a water fountain. I'm just saying.
Totally.
Be ready for it.
No one anywhere else in the world knows what a bubbler is.
Yeah.
Right.
A drinking fountain or water fountain.
We were trying to narrow it down once, because even in Wisconsin, like southern Wisconsin, you can find a water fountain still, but there's Milwaukee's bubbler.
Yes.
Is Kenosha bubbler? No.
Yeah, there you go.
So there's some sort of
State of Maine,
latitude. Maine has bubblers?
Bubba.
Right on.
I will say that was when I knew I had Wisconsin children, was when they came home from school and they said, yeah, I went to the bubbler. And I was like, oh, they're Wisconsin children. I don't even know.
Wonderful.
So it was great. Well, I've so enjoyed this time with our author, and thanks for letting us hear your freshest, newest work today, that poem that was improvised in addition to providing excellent insights. This has been such a pleasure, so thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. Thanks to you. Rebecca Meacham. Yes.